Hi, thanks for watching. My name is Dax Hammond, CMO of Network Insights, and with me is Paul McIntyre, who is the GM of Network Insights. Over the last 6 months, a lot of you have seen us putting out a lot of messaging around our new audience research and audience data solutions. You can find that under our brand of audience.ai, which is no surprise visible at audience.ai, and on our new Medium publication. So we thought to address a bunch of questions that people have, we would record this little conversation with Paul so that you can hear him talk about what we're doing and how we can help you. So Paul, thanks very much for joining us on the first one of these. Why don't you give a very quick overview as to what it is that we're doing with audience research and audience data?
Yeah, so it's actually very interesting times right now at Network Insights. We've rebranded our research and data division to Audience AI. We believe this reflects a better kind of vision and strategy for kind of where we want to go as an organization. It's really leveraging a lot of our conversational processing capabilities to predict a lot of life stage or segments that we can leverage for research, insights, and activation. So Network Insights has a long history. We've mostly spent our time in research and analytics. We have recently, in the past 12 months or so, launched our activation side of the business, which is targeting individuals or audiences based off of the conversations that they're happening over the internet. We process tens of millions of conversations a day. We are aggregating that and modeling that and scoring that and building audiences for advertisers and brands to activate.
So do you think it's fair to say conversational analysis is at the crux of what we're doing to generate that data?
Yes, I would say absolutely. I think where we play in this space, you have a lot of competitors in the data space. I think where we are unique is in the explicit intent, in our ability to find people who are actually talking about what they want to do, right? A lot of the data companies out there, they're using demographic information, they're using maybe browser information or purchase history. We fit an interesting niche in the ability to identify people who are actively not want to say conversating, but conversing about what they want to do and what they intend to do. So a new mover segment where people are asking questions about do they know someone who's a reputable moving company, or hey, I'm moving tomorrow. Does anyone have a mortgage agent they can talk to? We can aggregate that information, model it through our language processing capabilities, and define segments or analyses based off of that data.
The predictive stuff certainly seems to have been where the majority of the new revenue has come, right? Why target somebody 60 days after they've moved house when you can start targeting somebody 60 days before they move house, right? It kind of seems like a no-brainer. What other of those predictive life stages do you think are going to be particularly popular?
I honestly think a lot of them are. The common theme that we find with brands is, when you ask them what they're trying to do, in a lot of cases, there are hand signals that are being raised at any given moment. Whether it's someone who's going to a website to purchase something or someone who has an intention to move, whatever it may be, those hand signals are being, I don't want to say sold, but a lot of them are being sold, at that moment. And so there's a lot of competition. So there's a price competition, and then there's the ability to get in front of a consumer at the right time. Brands are constantly trying to get in front of that, and so that they can get their messaging out before. The new mover segment's also a good, kind of topic to easy to understand, because a lot of these companies are buying, postal service data, which could be up to several weeks old by the time you're actually buying that segment. So getting in front of the consumer faster, sooner, being able to articulate your message, up in the funnel is what a lot of these brands are trying to do. And we have that interesting capability of being able to define that type of behavior in advance and predict a lot of that intent.
Right. I think back to when you and I were at Chengo, right? And there we were playing around with data that was based on what people were searching for. And I think that was very good at finding people who were raising their hands saying they were actively wanting to do something. I think what is interesting about this that got me excited about it is, as you say, we're going back in time earlier so that you can start to get into somebody's consideration cycle before anybody else can. And I think if you get your marketing alignment right with that timing, then that should be very powerful. And it certainly looks like it is from what we're seeing on the data so far.
And yeah, sorry to cut you off, but I agree. And I think, when you think about, search for targeting, which is what we started at Chengo, at the time it was relatively, it was an interesting idea, it was an interesting concept. Think about how the technology has just changed over the last 5 to 7 years. The ability for, I know artificial intelligence is a big buzzword right now, but the ability to process a lot of this data in real time is getting cheaper, and the models are getting more complex. That was stuff that we didn't have 5, 7 years ago. So today, fast forward, we have the ability to process conversation, like literally people's spoken words that aren't really keyword based. They're not in a Google, redirect or something like that. And we can decipher intent. We can decipher emotion into, a conversation, and then be able to activate against that in a digital world, which is, I find, amazing.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples when I first came to meet the Network Insights team was, I think it was our head of data science who was explaining, lots of companies proudly say they can determine if someone says Apple, whether it means Apple the fruit or Apple the company. But I mean, is that really that interesting? The fact that we can understand if somebody's saying that or is using the expression apple of my eye, and they're saying it in a warm, fuzzy, emotional way, or whether they're being sarcastic about it, I think is a whole different level of analysis that hasn't really been possible before.
Yeah, and I know there's companies out there that can do positive, negative sentiment and what have you. I know one of the things that I also liked about Network Insights is we have like 46 classifications for sentiment or behavior,
right?
Or emotion, I should say. So the ability to provide research against 46 different types of emotions, but then using that in a data or activation world, negative doesn't necessarily mean bad. Negative could be fear, and so understanding whether someone's fearful of something or feels anger towards something, I think, are two very different emotions, and a lot of these companies out there aren't really distinguishing between the two, and then also being able to activate against those.
Stereotypically being British, I don't think I'm even meant to have 46 emotions.
I think it's
the emotional thing, I think, will be interesting to see how that unfolds. I know when I look back at some of the research stuff we've done, the fact that we're able to tell big electronic manufacturers what people's attitude towards emerging technology is going to be was a great example, right? Because you take the example at the moment, how we're looking at the finance company that's launching a credit card that is thinking about saying it's built on blockchain or whether to keep that quiet. That to me is an interesting use case because they want to know and understand what will the emotions be that people have when they say, here's a new credit card and it's based on blockchain, right? We'll look at whether people are fearful, whether people are cynical, or whether actually people are kind of quite excited and optimistic about it. And then that'll change their entire marketing strategy. That's a pretty cool thing to be able to do.
Yeah, and I think, kind of getting a little bit deeper, and I think where we add a lot of value is, this concept of like the whys behind the whys, right? So, why is someone fearful, or why is someone, positive towards, blockchain or whatever it may be? What are the driving factors that are causing this behavior to actually, bubble up onto the surface? I think that's one of the kind of the founding core principles that Network Insights has been founded on. And what our technology has been so strong and differentiated in the market is, not just, providing positive or negative sentiment towards a brand's, hashtag. It's really diving into the audience of the consumers that might interact with your brand, or even not interact with your brand for that matter, and answering pretty detailed, specific questions and thorough questions about it.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think we should revisit that in another one of these conversations about how the research piece really leverages that as well. But I think it would be useful for us to cover off a couple of quick tactical things around the data. So let's say somebody's watching this and they think, hey, I really like the idea of predicting new movers or first-time parents or about to become an empty nester, going off to college for the first time, etc. So they like that idea. They're already doing digital media buying. Maybe they're doing offline direct mail. How do they get our data?
That's probably one of the things we've been working the most on, which is the ability to make our data agnostic to platform. So, that requires a lot of integration. It requires a lot of, data processing or data logistics, so to speak. But ultimately, we have been working on the ability to provide audiences in an agnostic data fashion, so that you can use whatever platform you really want. There's certain ways in which we can do that pretty easily. Integration with LiveRamp. We have our own DMP that we have set up through Adobe. So if you are in Adobe Audience Manager, very easy way to port our information into your system, as well as just through LiveRamp integration as well. It's pretty, just through those two integrations, I think we have access to, dozens, if not more, buying platforms.
Right. Right.
And so direct mail, and on the direct mail side, a lot of our data is tied back to individuals, so we can actually marry up our information through opt-in data, and then be able to provide, direct marketing lists for people who want to do direct marketing campaigns or email campaigns.
Great. So it's fair to say that because of LiveRamp, nearly any DSP that somebody works with, we can get the data to them in one way or another.
Yeah, pretty much. Why recreate the wheel on that side, right? So leveraging people who've spent the time already integrating. So
yeah, and it means we are agnostic. So we're not trying to run the media so we can put in margin on the media side, right? This is data and this is what it costs and this is the value it has.
Right.
Why the emotion and sentiment analysis is really important was the presidential election of 18 months ago. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it also is an interesting story for me as well. And I think internally it was an interesting win, but not something we necessarily published in large capacity. But so we were doing an election coverage. I think it was with Wired, if I'm not mistaken, and where we were trying to leverage our data to provide insights into whether or not we could predict or understand the outcome of the election. I know, up until several weeks prior to the election, it was up in the air, if everyone recalls. And then I think it started to swing towards Hillary Clinton for most of the polling. And we, over the course of that period of time, leading up to the day before the election, we started to see swings in the types of emotion that we were seeing. And as our data science team was trying to get a good read on how they could leverage this, they were focusing historically on like positive emotions and could they understand the positive impact or the impact leveraging positive conversation. When we flipped that and actually decided to focus on the negative side of conversation and understanding what people are talking about from a negative capacity, we actually had a much more interesting and a better way to predict the outcome. And so, and I think it goes back to this, understanding positive, negative, but not just negative, but understanding fear versus anger versus the other types of emotions that we have. And by looking at it at that in-depth level, we actually called 49 out of the 50 states in the right direction when everyone had already was thinking that Hillary was going to win. We actually saw the opposite. So, so I thought that was an interesting use of our data and how we can leverage it for just better insight.
What I find particularly interesting about that is the way we work, of course, is that people have to be conversing about a topic in order for us to have data, right? So there are certain topics that just don't fall into our world because people aren't talking about them online. What was great about that is, sadly, the one thing that we are awash with on the internet is people having hate and expressing that hate quite a lot. And we've now built out segments from that, right? Using the idea that strong emotion leads to strong actions. And if you put up your hand and say, I hate Verizon, well, then could be that you're a good lead for AT&T or T-Mobile and somebody. So it's unfortunate, but hate and love's a great source of data for us.
Right, and that's that exactly stemmed our cell phone segment, right? The this concept of the election brought out our ability to build segments for people who are dissatisfied or do not like their current cell phone carrier, right? So, so the concept of analyzing that conversation from a political perspective or election perspective created the ability for us to do the same thing in different types.
Right. And I suppose also you and I in our past have seen challenges with data not being fresh enough to really be worthwhile, right? Again, if we think back to Django and search data, it didn't matter so much how the recency was if people were starting to look around for a mortgage because it was a very long consideration cycle. But we know if you're going to renew or change your cell phone or your cell phone plan, the consideration might be as short as 24, 48, 72 hours. And so the fact that data is so recent, I guess, really plays to that.
Yeah, I mean, I know we spent a lot of time in terms of our infrastructure building out our database, which is all in real time. So the data of the tens of millions of conversations that we're processing each day, they're all being added into our storage facility or wherever we keep our data, and it being updated. The cloud, yes. But yeah, so I think with that, you're right. I think the freshness of our data, and then the ability to actually then sometimes, to your point, you don't necessarily need that time, that recency. Sometimes you can extend that, so the capability of being able to do just that in general is also something that we have.
Yeah. A question we get asked a lot when we go talk to people about being able to build custom data segments for their needs is there really enough scale? I think it'd be interesting for you to talk a moment about the retail client that we're kind of solving that for, where on an individual custom segment basis, there's very little scale, but those segments perform very well. That's a common problem in the industry. But what we've been able to do is replicate that over and over again to find scale. Can you add a little bit more detail to that?
Yeah, I think that and if you've ever bought media or optimized media, that's the age-old question, right? Scale and performance is always they're polar in most cases. A lot of times we do run into issues where yes, we just don't have the data, as you said. We certainly would let you know if we don't. But another way in which we, I think, do add a lot of value is in this ability to provide custom segments that are granular and unique, and then be able to do that over and over in short capacity or fast, relatively quick capacity. So rather than having to build a very, not necessarily targeted segment, like fashionists, so the company that we're working with or that you were referring to, yes, they can go by women who are interested in fashion pretty much anywhere, right? But what we can do is, women who are interested in fashion, who like certain types of shoes or a certain type of, flavor of the, new fashion trend, we can get that granular and say there are 15 of those different types of things. We could build those 15 different segments out. So they may not necessarily be large in each individual instance, but they, we have the ability and flexibility to build lots of them. And so the aggregate number allows you to be able to get at things at scale, but then also to do it at a very granular level. So I think that's a pretty interesting, compelling advantage that we have.
And I think with them, it worked particularly well because I think all data companies, when they provide the data and run the media, are doing that to an extent. But in order to get the balance between performance and scale, they're blending it all together and doing some lookalike and so on.
Of course.
Because we're only giving them the data, they are transparently themselves pushing media at different quantities to each of those micro segments. And finding the threshold of performance in each one. And when they need more scale, we help them find more segments. One of my favorite segments that popped up from that was data science was telling me last week that when they looked at some of the audiences for one of their clothing range, it actually turned out that the greatest signal to identify who those people would be is that they were really into Rihanna. And the way it was explained was they're not just really into Rihanna, like they are really into Rihanna. They are the Rihanna fan club members. They're getting the magazine on a monthly basis. Is that still a thing? They're getting the, they're advocating for her on Instagram or whatever passionately. And they had no understanding or connection to Rihanna culture for the company. And yet that's an incredibly well performing segment.
Well, and that does two things, right? From a targeting perspective, that's certainly something that can be leveraged, but also from a research perspective, right? So leveraging that from a content strategy, leveraging that from a promotional strategy, from a sponsorship strategy, there's a lot of ways you can take that and find those tidbits to help brands enhance their own presence, right? So I think there's from a performance perspective, certainly identifying the right individuals at the right time. All that stuff is certainly important. I think where we also add a lot of value is all of our data is tied back to people. And so I think rather than, cookies on a browser or whatever it may be, people, surfing the internet or bot traffic or not human traffic, gets lumped into a lot of these segments. And I know the statistics are anywhere from 20+% that of all traffic can be potentially even fraudulent or non-human.
Wow.
Everything that we, every segment that we create is tied back to our database of over 500 million, profiles that are, human consumer-based profiles. So everything that then gets pushed out to the ecosphere is consumer-driven. So we believe just inherently by finding the right individuals is great. Obviously, cleansing it, so to speak, so that we remove any of the bots or non-human traffic also seems to have a tip for performance as well.
Right. Good. Is there anything else you think the audience should know about our data right now?
I think it performs. I think it's unique, and I think you should try it.
I love it. Good stuff. Thanks very much, Paul.
No problem. Thanks.